Welcome back. We are up in the showroom here at Sabersmith in Sunfield, Michigan. And with us still, we have Adam from Lansing Longsword Guild. And so I have tortured Adam a bit I took him on a whole tour of the shop and made him go through an interview, and I have yet to actually let him hold any swords. And that's kind of intentional because I figured that, that way you guys can watch as he checks out our blades. And I already know that these are not like geared towards your specific area of interest, but we'll just start over here. For example, here is one of our arming swords. But yeah, everything we do, we've got different types, different cultures, different time periods, but it's all that 1075. So when it's heat treated right, we go to an RC56 on the Rockwell scale. Got that nice flex to it. I'm sure different than...
Certainly, I want much more flex in a blade.
Because of the type of fighting
I'm hitting somebody
doing.
with it.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is it feels a little heavy, but as how wrapped the hilt is, there's some geometry to it, which I really like.
Yeah. And that has the wire in it, which is better if you are wearing leather gloves because it helps to bite into the glove so it's not slipping around. Yeah. But we do also on any of these make them with just full leather wraps as well. But that is just kind of a personal preference thing. Yeah. If people are buying them for collector's items, it doesn't really matter. The wrap, you just pick the one that you like the best color-wise or whatever. But for function, different.
These historically, you often see once they start putting in complex hilts.
Which on some of them, like say my side sword has that secondary guard. Yeah. But yes, when we didn't have those, even though on blades that we don't have that extra finger guard, we would get slack from people that wanted to be able to put their finger up. So it's like, okay, you know what? Well, I'll add it there so you have the option.
That's where the guards came from, is because at some point somebody did this.
Yeah.
And then they were like, hey, what if we put a thing here?
Yep.
One of the interesting differences with sort of 1570s rapier is that the grip is like this.
Yeah.
Not like this. Whereas like 17th century stuff, it's a lot more finger over the cross guard. And there was a thumb guard.
Right.
That became like vestigial in later ones because people were holding it differently. But if you're doing it in sort of the German way with your thumb up here, having that big thumb guard was
useful.
And really useful. Yeah.
I feel like I've seen those a lot on messers as well.
Yeah.
Like that extra
messers and Bissacks would have had it. Yeah.
Well, if you thought that was heavy, here's a falchion. That's taking that extra
This
weight.
actually doesn't feel as heavy as it looks.
No. Well, that is important. That does have a much heavier pommel as well, which helps balance that out. But I mean, that gives you lots of chopping power.
For sure. I like the clipped point. That's something you see in messers from the 15th century.
So this is something that I get, and at some point I might add a messer specifically, but it's so hard. There's so many weapons in history, and we already have 50 different weapons we build in our product line, which is, as to my knowledge, a larger product line than almost any other sword maker that isn't mass-produced in China or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's only so many weeks in a year. Yeah. And so when I already make a falchion that's like so similar to a messer that it's like, it's hard to...
Just a couple different things on the
hilts, like the cross guard, I feel like is one of the big things.
And again, like a lot of the terms we have are sort of categorical. And we've mentioned already, like you can use several different words to mean the same sword or vice versa.
Well, it's like,
right?
My understanding is that like in Roman times, the word gladius was just a word for sword.
Yeah.
And like
honestly, most swords
through
history have those special names because that's one particular region or language for sword.
Yeah, like we get people who are like, oh, do you guys make Zweihanders? And they're like, you mean like a two-hander?
Yeah.
Yes. No. Right. Yes. What, depending on what you're picturing. So like I said, our primary focus is using historic blade designs and then using that as inspiration to design our own. We don't really delve into the world of fantasy as much, but every once in a while we're like, you know what, screw it, like let's do this or that or whatever. Yeah. And so this is one that always have the price tags on them, which just makes it a little harder to hold. But this is what we call our Elven dagger. But even this still has like historic inspiration. The I think it's the Qajar, which is like a Middle Eastern dagger you commonly see like in their belts, is a very similar type of knife. Yeah. But we have a sword version of this as well.
The back edge, the whole way down.
Because sometimes we just like being extra dangerous.
Why not? Yeah. One thing that's consistent through history is that people think swords are cool.
Yeah. Right? And, a lot of times through history, like that was one of the things when I was at the that one specific museum in France was there were a lot of weird oddball things and they were an actual like this was made in the 14th century. Or once firearms came into play, there are like a whole huge display case full of somebody said let's add a gun to it. Yeah. So pole arms with a single shot barrel, axes with a single shot barrel.
Those come up a lot. I get asked about those in fencing too. Most of those are masterworks for guildsmen.
Neat.
So they're not really intended to be like, you're not going to give that to a mercenary or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But those are for testing for your master's rank within a guild, which mean you're making a lot more money. You can have your own shop. You're a lot more powerful within the city structure and everything. Yep. So if you're a steel maker, a gun maker, or whatever, and you can strap a sword to a gun or vice versa, that just shows off your technical skills, right?
Yeah.
And they have to function, but they have to function like the gun has to shoot and the sword has to cut, and that's it. It's not meant for the battlefield. It's going to sit in somebody's closet until it gets to, the Met or whatever.
Yeah. Eventually they end up at a museum. So this is one, like I mentioned, our kiln is only so big. Yeah. So we make a claymore. This is our claymore. But I've had people that are like, oh, that this should, many of these were a lot longer. Sure. Probably, yes. No argument. Every culture at some point said, let's make it bigger. Right. Literally everyone through history was like, their regular swords were much smaller, but every once in a while they built a giant one because
swords are cool.
Swords are cool.
And why not? Yeah.
And mostly used by men through most of history. And men have a tendency to want a bigger one.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
But again, we try to balance them decently. They've got that nice flex to them, which again might not be the same as like what you're used to with the training ones, but they are for a sword that you like use on a battlefield. Yeah. Pretty dang good flex. A gladius. Let's find a cool looking one. The other thing that we do is we offer all these different finishes. One of the things is that we are building these for people that are collectors, right? Yeah. So when we got started, this is a good example, just the natural steel, what we call a satin finish, a black leather grip, very simplistic. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the most practical. Yeah. Right? Okay, no problem. Here we are like 27 years later. And if all we had ever done was made that simple, basic one, we would have just lost our minds. We might have, honestly. But either way, so instead, we do a bunch of different finishes. We have blue or gold can be achieved just through the fire, through a tempered finish. Also purple, but that's a little harder to control. Or we do some with a black blade or an acid etch finish. The acid etch is kind of cool. It's one of my favorites because it gives you kind of an effect almost as if it's like an actual antique sword.
Oh, yeah.
It gives you that kind of like old, I dug this up out of the ground. Yeah. And I would assume that in certain cultures different, but a lot of swords through history that were used, like actual swords that were getting used, they didn't try to polish them to a really shiny finish because there's no function to that. Like without power tools, polishing steel to what we're used to, like this level of shininess, was a lot of effort.
That's what your spire's for.
Right. Yeah. If you were lucky enough to have one. Exactly. I'm sure that's through a lot of the blacksmithing shops through the history was the apprentice
that
was
is,
stuck doing
like
that
that's
kind of
one thing that talking to blacksmiths and whatnot, when they, they'll do what you did. It's like, well, we know it's not authentic and everything. And like, I know that's not going to be, but a lot of like the labor saving stuff that you're using with machinery is just what they would have had dozens of boys for, right? They would have had the apprentices, and they would have had the journeymen, and they would have had shop boys and stuff to do all that work. So you're just using what we have in the culture to solve the same problem.
Right.
And of course it's going to be a little
and that's like one of the things when we get people that reach out to us, they're like, oh, do you guys do, do you do apprenticeships? We'll get that question a lot. And I've been tempted to be like, actually, I've been thinking about it. So are your parents, like, here's our fee. Your parents pay us this fee.
That's how that works.
And then you live in my woodshed. And every morning before dawn, you get the fires going and you haul the coal and whatever. And their eyes are like, what? And I was like, and plus, the first thing you're going to learn, is where the coal is kept. But then teach you how to make a nail. And then we'll show you this barrel, this empty barrel, and it's like, all right, now that you can successfully make that nail, fill that barrel with nails. Oh, okay. Months later, and then it's like, all right, I finished, master. And it's like, great. Let me show you where the empty barrels are kept. And it's like, because every single nail through all of history had to be hand forged.
Yeah.
And everything else. I mean, all the hinges, everything. So, bladesmithing, except during times of war, was like a whole separate like specialty. And there's kind of a hierarchy when it came to the crafts. There's the guy that the farrier or whatever made horseshoes every day and little basic things. And then, I'm sure in major cities there were
that was part of like that literally ranked, like guilds were ranked within cities, and in German cities they had I can't remember the specific term in German, but they were basically like the gentlemen's guilds. Like those are the merchants, those are the importer exporters, people who deal with like foreign goods and everything. Were always at the top tier, and then there were like the hand makers were a little bit lower than that.
Interesting.
So that is specifically a thing that was done historically.
So here's another one that will get people like, oh, well, this is our greatsword.
Yeah.
And again, scaled appropriately because I wanted it to be a functional sword. And some greatswords in history got huge. Oh, yeah. And they're super cool. But at a certain point, I almost kind of, in my brain, I almost think of them more as like a polearm than a sword. Like as when they get to that large of a scale. Yeah. Because like you can't, at that point, you can't really use the techniques of like sword fighting the same way.
And we can't even practice with them really because it's just the impact is too dangerous to swing at a person.
So that might be where foam
yeah,
really would come into play.
Foam definitely helps, and you get different physical artifacts from different things, obviously, because if you're using something that you expect to have an 8-pound weight at the end of it, that's a halberd, and now it's foam, it's going to behave differently, right?
Yep.
But when we play at our club with polearms and whatnot, we just sort of, I call it like checkmate fencing. We don't actually even go to hit each other. We just get to positions where we could. Where I know the next action I'm going to take is I'm going to thrust you in the face, but I'm not going to. Yeah. Because I'm going to, and I know that you're going.
And then we reset and go again. Yeah, interesting.
And that way we can play at a sort of. This actually feels pretty good.
Yeah. So this is our hand and a half.
Yeah.
And functionally the same basic sword as the arming sword, but a little longer handle, a little longer blade. But yeah, it's just like a couple ounces of steel changing really does change the feel. Because like you said, that arming sword feels a little bit forward heavy. But that's going to be exclusively a one-handed sword, which means if you're fighting sword and board and you're hacking with it, kind of need a little bit extra weight on that end. Otherwise, you're going to have to put it. Whereas this, you could use two-handed. Yeah.
This is balanced really well.
Thanks. That's our most popular sword.
Yeah.
We sell a ton of Khopesh. One of my favorites, just because it has one of the most interesting blade shapes in history.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know if they died off in interest just after Rome took over so much that like Egypt they had been growing in power, and then as a world power kind of went backwards, and that never spread. But it's really cool design.
It is. I have very little to say because I'm not familiar.
I've
never handled one, but they are.
That would have been my understanding is that essentially a lot of those early blades, you're taking like a farm implement, and then like there's all these steps of modification as it like slowly changed from like something that you use for wheat to like, oh, well, I'll use this for war. Oh, it's not really quite right. And then they tweaked it until you had like this. But they're definitely one of the most interesting ones. I am curious, what was the name of that like cutlassy one you were saying?
A Dussac.
A Dussac. I'm curious what length that is. Like, is it shorter or longer? Or?
Yeah.
They were different?
Right? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
This is about, so part of the problem with studying Dussac from the texts is that every Dussac in the text is represented by it's a wood or leather training tool, because that's what they use in the civic festivals, and you're training kids with it, basically, right?
Yeah.
There were steel swords that were curved with a complex hilt, but they came in any variety that you might want,
Gotcha.
Right? So I usually just shorthand to say it's like a cutlass.
Yeah.
Just because, again, a cutlass can be, right? It's your Captain Blood cutlass, right? It's a big bull hilt, and it's a curved sword, and that's it.
And we've made many varieties over the years. We've made more intricate handled, crossguard ones. We've made longer blades. We've made shorter ones. Actually. Yeah. Well, ships were small. Like even the really big ships, you're right here. Yeah. It wasn't a nice fencing where we're in a nice lane and there's no obstructions at all, and we're going to have this combat between each other as gentlemen. No, you're right up on top of the next guy.
There's a book written he was I think a captain
Okay.
in the Royal Navy in 1812. His name is Pringle Green, and he wrote basically a book about boarding actions. And he has several things with cutlasses in this. And basically it's a vertical chop.
Yep.
And it's a parry, and that's it. That's the fencing, right? And everything else is about how the ships are joined, because you're standing here like this and just trying to get over the rails or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, to make this a dussac, take the blade, make a slightly different hilt, like a basket sort of on this side and a thumb ring on this side, and that's a dussac.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
That's just one I hadn't, a specific term I hadn't heard, but I also have not ever specifically studied German swords as a specialty. So this is our side sword. I mentioned that we have both a side sword and a rapier. We use the same blade.
Yeah.
So, but our side sword is just a much more simplified guard. Yeah. Our rapier is fancier.
Yeah. That's the difference.
That is what I've
Honestly,
learned. When I did some research, that is what I learned.
As far as I'm concerned, like it's sort of the shape of the hilt change a little bit, and that's more or less it.
Yep.
The text, again, try to do more thrust, just because like in theory it is better. Yeah. Right. But the theory is misapplied all the time.
A lot of that is based on single fighting, one-on-one, not necessarily on a battlefield. That's what almost
all the books are.
Right.
Like that's because, again, that's the way you show
dueling,
the depth of the art.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. No, this actually feels really, really good.
Thanks.
Yeah. The only thing I would, as a fencer, is that the sort of the squareness of the guard
over more
makes it a little difficult to handle, because I want to be able to change the edge that I'm cutting with, and change my grip really quickly. And this is just sort of like
too blocky.
It's a little blocky.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing, when you look at historical swords, a lot of times like the crossguard will have some texture,
like a divot or something.
Yeah, it'll just be some little thing.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons is you lay your thumb on it,
so you
and that's where you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't have to look at it. I just know where I'm holding the sword.
Right.
I know exactly where everything is.
Yeah.
And that's, again, one of the reasons for these sort of the finger loops and whatnot, because people just started holding it like this.
Yep.
And even holding it this way, again, this is a little blocky.
Yeah.
So if I were to fence with this, and like the blade itself feels perfully fine for it.
Shape down that guard a little
this
bit
is
more.
Just kind of, it feels a little
that's
clunky.
Good feedback.
And
we, like I said, I've mentioned this before, but like everything here evolves. So what you guys are seeing today, whether you see us at the Ren Fair or you're seeing us on YouTube for the first time or whatever, what you are seeing now is after 27 years of business. The early swords that we made were nothing like this. I kind of wish I have one at home, one of our earliest ones, and like just a 5-pound sword that's only this big. And I mean, we used to do demonstrations where we chopped cinder blocks in half. Like they were beefy, but I can't really say they were like very well balanced swords, but they were cool. Rapier, so same concept, but different guard.
Yeah. Again, blade feels really great. I would want a slightly more of a cross guard, but this is a common shape.
As far as like this, like a longer.
I like having a straight crossbar
going
out.
Which I think I actually have a photo of one we just did, like a cup hilt rapier.
But yeah, I like the wire.
Yeah, this was one we just sold at the fair that was like a cup hilt style like that. But we can definitely, that's not something that's like super custom.
As a fencer, I could put a point through any of these.
Yes.
But that's true of a lot of historical ones too. But
the basket guards are interesting with that. These are my nemesis, I always think, because they, no matter how you design it, they are one of the most tedious things is making those basket guards. Yeah. And it's why usually you'll commonly see us at the Ren Fair. We might have one as a sample piece and you have to take an order because they're just really more time consuming than the sword.
This is the kind of thing that, I mentioned Meyer was a cutler. Like this is the kind of thing he'd be doing, right? Because even in the 16th century, it was better for individual businesses to concentrate on the thing they could do quickly.
Japan did a similar thing, though. They had people that their specialty was the crossguard, the Suba, and they had people that, like, I'm sure not for the average sword that went on the battlefield, but for like the noble class, they had people that all they did was make these like beautiful. I mean, I've seen some of them that are like, that's a whole work of art, just this guard, which is fun too. So a saber.
Also feels pretty good.
Yeah, those were light and fast. And again, this is another one that has a lot of variations through history. Some of them, if it was like nautical, it was a little shorter. If it was a horseman's one, it would be longer. Yeah, so this is our saber. Ironically, when I came on in 2003, we didn't make any sabers. And I kind of harassed the owner, like, well, you can't call it a sabersmith without making a saber, you know? But yeah, we've been building them ever since, really, and we've done so many variations. This is with the full D guard, but we also have what I feel like gives it a little bit more of almost like a Middle Eastern look, like S guard and pommel, and it changes the balance a little bit. Every time we change a pommel or cross guard or whatever, that extra little bit or less of steel changes the balance, and that is one of the things when people are on our website and they can either buy, these are all the items that are on the website, by the way. Everything in the showroom right now is ready to ship. If you went online and you're like, I want that one tonight, it'll ship tomorrow. Or you can pick and choose and do a built to order, and you get to pick all those options. Yeah. But they sometimes change the feel. And it's like, and that's why I think a lot of people buy them in person, because then they can like hold it and you can be like, oh, this is what it feels like. Scimitar.
So again, put a complex hilt on any of these, and it's just accurate.
Yeah, interesting.
So they usually, the German uses long edge, short edge to do kind of the forward and the back edge, and the short edge is usually because of this. Yeah. Right? So this is the clip point sharpened to maybe the last third or whatever. Yeah. It's shorter than the edge that you have forward. But yeah, like there's. You often might see them called Sinclair sabers. Okay. Those are the Dusaks. Yeah. Those were steel Dusaks they just found in like piles in Sweden, because they were like the king ordered thousands of them to equip farmers because there was war. Oh, interesting. And they ordered a bunch from like Scotland, England. Yeah. But they were just curved swords, complex hilt. Yeah. It's a Dusak, right? So yeah, literally any of these blades you could put
that kind of cross guard on. Interesting.
It's a Dusak. So
yeah. The Polish and Russian like cavalries, the Hussars, I think is one of the cultures, whatever. They had variations of these as well. And, you know, we've had people like, oh, well, can you make that's a very common request, is just somebody's like, in their mind, they have their favorite, right? Whatever it might be. And they're like, oh, can you make a blah? And so what we usually respond is like, feel free to send us in imagery with dimensions and we'll have a conversation. I tend to only do custom work for people who are already collectors, because it's like, okay, if you've been coming to us for years, you've bought 10 swords. Right. Yeah, I don't mind building you a custom one, but like, it's kind of tough when somebody walks in the door and like, wow, I love your work, except I don't want to buy any of it. Can you make me this thing that has nothing to do with your product line? It's like, not really. Right. Short sword, one of the most basic things. Yeah. But in a lot of cultures, the peasant, like people being pulled into the armies, had a spear, and if they were lucky, also had like a big little short sword or a big dagger as their backup weapon. Pole arm didn't work out.
Midshipmen in the Royal Navy in the 19th century wore a dirk.
Okay, yeah,
and that was a badge of rank.
Yep,
just a little sword.
Here's our two-hander. This one's kind of half between a two-handed longsword and another bastard sword. I don't know what length your standard German ones.
About this, maybe slightly longer. Probably a little bit longer, because my probably comes up to about here all the way.
That's what I've seen when people have requested the German longswords. Looking at them, they look like they're a little longer than some of the English ones and such.
Honestly, this feels pretty good. I mean, it's
the balance is great. It's long.
It's a little heavy toward the hand. Yeah, I want the balance point to be a little farther out.
Is your stuff primarily two-handed or both?
Longsword, it's all two-handed.
Okay, I was curious. Yeah.
I mean, again, we've talked about it before. Like, longsword is just the word we use, because the word they use in the text is sword. Yeah. Schwert. That's it. Yeah. And the longsword, short sword in those texts is longsword is held out, long, length. Short sword is this. Oh, okay. Is when you grip halfway. So that's when you're fighting somebody in armor, or you need an extra stiffness on a parry or something like that. That's short sword.
Just right up on the guy. You don't have any other option.
Well, and this is never going to cut through armor.
Full armor, yeah.
So I have to point it in an armpit, or I have to get it behind the knee, or I have to get it through the visor or whatever. And so using your second hand kind of up like this to go around is useful, and they call that short sword.
Right.
So I got
You're
my
fine.
handprint
We
all over it.
purposely waited to oil everything until I know your hands are going to get real oily, but we make all these out of high carbon spring steel. So for those of you who are not familiar, they do need to be oiled. But if you're ever shopping online for a sword and it's made out of stainless steel, it is a very pretty metal statue that looks like a sword.
Yeah.
Swords are not made out of stainless steel. And all these change. So like this is actually just an example. Like this is a new pommel design, and then the different wraps. So if that one's too heavy, but it changes the weight. So like this is the same sword with
Definitely
a different grip.
Feels different.
Yeah, and this is where I think we tend to do best in person, but the overall quality on everything is the same, all built to that same standard. So when somebody's shopping online, you're getting that quality of sword. It's just what it feels like. It's one of the reasons we're going to be doing cutting demonstrations and things like that to give people context.
So this cutout bit, I like it aesthetically.
It doesn't really do anything for this type of sword.
No, but there are examples historically of that being there, and I mentioned earlier, but a lot of times like it's because they have a complex hilt or whatever. The fencing swords we use usually have extra material down here.
Interesting.
And part of that is for weight distribution. Yeah, they call it a shield.
Okay, yeah.
So a shield just means shield.
Yeah.
But the idea is if my grip is this with my thumb forward, which is how all of the images, at least of my text, show, having that little extra bit there means that my thumb's probably not going to get hit.
Right.
It's also as wide as a quote unquote real blade would be.
Yeah.
And it helps to
because I've seen that on the faders a lot, where they've got that little extra bit there, but then the actual blade gets a lot thinner going down.
And that way you can have like a thinner blade with some flexibility,
right?
But also it's stiffer toward the strong, right? They call this the strong of the blade.
Yep.
And it also helps protect your thumb because it's going to be out.
So it's getting your hands chopped off or fingers chopped off was probably pretty darn common through a lot of history. It wasn't just the Skywalkers that had that issue. This is our Viking sword. We've got different variations of them. We do different pommels, different guards and such, but we also do one just kind of for fun. But we've had a lot of people, there's a lot of things. So it just says our name. Yeah. It says Sabersmith because we're the ones that made it, right? And that, got famous recently because they did a documentary or whatever. But I always laughed when people would ask me that if we could do an Ulfbert sword. And it's like, okay, I'll make you something very similar. However, if I sign a dead swordsmith's name onto our work, that'd be like me doodling and signing it Monet. And that's that's not how that works. Yeah. We're going to change from forging to forgeries. But so that's like the main line of swords. I feel like there's a couple. What are we missing? Centurion sword. This is a cool blade that is loosely based off a spatha. Oh yeah, and the Japanese ones are behind us.
That's nice.
Yeah, and so that says, "Hail Caesar, we who are about to die salute you" down the blade. Supposedly what the gladiators said right before they fought to the death. I'm guessing multiple of them through history are probably flipping off Caesar. I mean, the ones that were forced to
most of them weren't actually fighting to the death.
Right.
It was
the average was
to the very bloody conclusion, whatever that was, but probably not death.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
It was a bad investment to kill off your fighters. Yeah.
It takes a long time. Yeah.
But so we have the capability of doing much more intricate work,
like
but
the wreath.
Yeah, it comes out really cool. We actually do a custom sheath for that allows you to see the engraving because I've got a cutout going down the handle or going down the scabbard, which is fun. Yeah, all the tags get in the way, but they're inevitable.